The elevator rises in silence. Serafina Vale stands with her hands clasped, her fingers tight. The mirrored walls reflect her calm face, neat blouse, steady posture. She looks fine. She is not. Roman Duval stands beside her, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone. He has not looked at her since they left the clinic. His jaw is hard. His silence feels heavy. A few minutes earlier, the doctor had spoken with care. More follow-up, more tests, more patience, no final answer, no blame. Serafina heard caution. Roman heard failure. The elevator opens into their penthouse. Glass walls, white stone floors, soft light, expensive art. It looks perfect. Tonight, it feels cold. Roman walks in first, tosses his keys onto the marble table, and heads for the bar. He pours a drink and stares at the city. Serafina watches him. She knows this version of him. Quiet, distant, closed off. She steps closer. Roman, no answer. You do not have to shut me out. Still nothing. She takes a slow breath. I know today was hard, but we are still on the same side. Roman lowers the glass and turns. His eyes are cold, hurt, and fixed on her. Before he speaks, she knows this night will change everything. Roman studies her for a long moment, as if he is weighing whether truth still matters in this room. Serafina holds his gaze, though her chest feels tight. She has seen him angry before. She has seen him exhausted, withdrawn, and sharp with stress. This feels different, too controlled, too cold. He sets the glass down. Tell me the truth, he says. She blinks. About what? A bitter smile touches his mouth, but there is no warmth in it. Do not make me say it twice. Her stomach drops. Roman, what are you talking about? He steps closer, not fast, not loud, but with a hardness that makes the room feel smaller. At the clinic, he says, the way you acted, the way you kept looking at the doctor. Like there is something I am not being told. Serafina stares at him. That is not true. His eyes do not soften. Then explain why it feels like I am the last person in my own marriage to know what is going on. The words hit harder because they come without shouting. They carry suspicion, not confusion, judgment, not pain. She feels heat rise behind her eyes, but her voice stays steady. You think I am hiding something from you? Roman says nothing at first. That silence gives her the answer. And suddenly, the distance between them no longer feels like stress. It feels like damage. For a second, Serafina cannot move. She stands in the middle of the living room, staring at the man she married, trying to understand how grief has turned into this. Months of appointments, hope, disappointment, and quiet pain. And this is where he has landed. Not beside her. Against her, her voice comes out low. Say it clearly. Roman runs a hand over his face, but the tension in him does not break. Too many things are not adding up. That is not an answer. He looks at her with a kind of wounded pride that frightens her more than anger would. I do not know what to believe anymore. The words hit like a slap. Not because they are loud, but because they strip something bare between them. Trust, safety, the simple belief that home is the one place where love does not put you on trial. Serafina feels her throat tighten. After everything, this is what you think of me? Roman does not speak. That silence hurts more than any accusation with details ever could. She sees it now. He is not asking her for truth. He is measuring her with suspicion. He is making her stand in the shadow of his fear and answer for something she did not do. A deep stillness settles inside her. A marriage can survive pressure. It can survive grief. It can survive disappointment. But once cruelty enters, something precious begins to die. She looks at him, and for the first time, he feels like a stranger standing in her home. Neither of them speaks for a while. The city glows beyond the glass, bright and distant, while the silence inside the penthouse turns heavy enough to feel. Serafina's heart pounds, but her face stays calm. She refuses to fall apart in front of a man who has already decided fear matters more than trust. She looks at him and asks the only question left. Do you truly believe what you are implying? Roman paces a few steps, then stops. His hand tightens at his side. For one brief moment, she thinks he will take it back. She thinks he will say he is tired, ashamed, confused. She thinks he will choose love. He does not. "I said what I said," he replies. "That is enough." Serafina feels something inside her go still. Not rage, not panic, something deeper, a quiet break, the kind that comes when the last piece holding hope in place gives way. She nods once, slowly, as if accepting a truth she never wanted. "All right," she says. Her voice is steady. That seems to unsettle him more than tears would. Without another word, she turns and walks toward the guest room. Behind her, Roman says nothing. No apology, no plea, no footsteps following her, only silence. This time, it no longer feels like marriage. It feels like the end. Serafina closes the guest room door and leans against it, one hand pressed to her chest. Only then does she let herself feel it. Not the argument, not the clinic, not even the insult hidden inside his accusation. The loss, because something has shifted in a way she cannot deny. Love had already been under strain. Grief had already made their home quieter. But this is different. This is what happens when trust is wounded at its root. She looks around the room, small, neat, untouched by the life they built together, and realizes pain does not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in one sentence, one look, one moment that shows you the person beside you no longer feels safe. If this story pulls you in, subscribe now, like this video, and stay with me to the end, because what begins in this penthouse will uncover a truth far bigger than one broken night. In the other room, Roman remains alone with his pride, his fear, and the silence he chose. Serafina sits on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. She had married a man she believed would protect her heart. So, how did they get here? How did a love that once felt honest collapse into suspicion, distance, and damage so deep it could not be hidden anymore? Before Serafina Vale ever stood beside wealth, cameras, and polished society smiles, she learned how to live with structure, restraint, and self-respect. She grows up in St. Louis, in a home where values are not spoken for effect. They are lived daily. Her mother is a school principal, respected, firm, and measured. A woman who believes standards matter even when no one is watching. Her father repairs hospital equipment, a careful man with steady hands and a quiet sense of duty. Their home is not rich, not flashy, and never built on appearances. It is built on order, effort, and the belief that a good name should come from character, not noise. From childhood, Serafina understands that dignity is not something you wear. It is something you carry. She is not raised to chase attention. She is raised to finish what she starts, speak with care, and never expect life to hand her what she has not worked for. While other girls dream of glamour, she becomes interested in people, in the way tone changes meaning, in the way rooms shift when tension enters, in the difference between what people say and what they fear. She watches her mother lead difficult meetings without raising her voice. She watches her father solve complex problems without demanding praise. Without knowing it, she is learning the shape of calm strength. In school, Serafina is bright, focused, and disciplined. She does not need to be the loudest person in a room to leave an impression. Teachers trust her. Classmates rely on her. She develops the rare habit of listening fully before speaking, and when she does speak, people tend to stop and hear her out. That quiet authority follows her into college, where she studies public relations. The field fits her mind. She understands image, pressure, and human behavior. She knows how quickly one wrong message can damage years of effort. Her path after graduation is demanding. She takes unpaid internships, works long hours, and accepts the sort of invisible labor many people hate, but few survive well. She writes statements no one credits her for. She fixes communication errors made by senior people who act as if correction is beneath gratitude. She stays late, learns fast, and sharpens herself through repetition. Nothing comes easily. Every promotion is earned. By the time she reaches Chicago and secures a respected role at a crisis communications firm, Serafina has already built herself from the ground up. She becomes known for precision, control, and grace under pressure. She can steady a room, soften a scandal, and guide difficult people through public tension without losing her own composure. She is elegant, but never showy, intelligent, but never arrogant, strong, but never hard for the sake of display. What most people later admire in Serafina is not luck, beauty, or access. It is the fact that she built her life before love ever entered it. Roman Duval moves through Chicago like a man who has long understood what money can buy, what influence can bend, and what weakness can cost. By his mid-30s, he is already one of the city's most talked-about real estate billionaires. His company holds luxury towers, commercial properties, restored landmarks, and large development plans that keep his name in business columns and private meetings where major decisions are made. Investors trust his instincts. Journalists follow his schedule. City officials return his calls. When Roman enters a room, people notice, even before he speaks. Part of it is wealth. Part of it is control. Roman does not carry himself like a man surprised by power. He wears it as if it has weight, and he has trained himself to lift it without showing strain. His suits are sharp, his timing exact, his tone measured. He knows when to speak, and when silence will do more work for him. In meetings, he rarely wastes words. He lets other people reveal too much, then steps in with a calm remark that shifts the entire direction of the conversation. That makes him effective. It also makes him difficult to forget. Publicly, Roman is seen as disciplined, brilliant, and ambitious. The young billionaire who took family advantage and multiplied it into something larger. The builder who can look at a neglected part of the city and see value before anyone else does. The man with enough polish to stand in a ballroom full of donors and enough edge to hold his own in a boardroom where millions are at stake. People often speak of him with admiration, but there is caution in it too. Roman's charm is real, yet precise. He can make people feel chosen with one focused glance, one thoughtful question, one moment of complete attention. When he wants to be warm, he is disarming. He remembers names. He remembers details. He knows how to make a person feel heard without giving away too much of himself in return. Women notice him for obvious reasons, but many are drawn even more by the sense that he is hard to reach. He does not give himself away easily, and scarcity often makes attention feel more valuable. He also knows how to use generosity. Well, he appears at charity events, supports education projects, funds urban renewal efforts, and writes checks large enough to make people speak of him with gratitude long after the evening ends. Cameras catch him in tailored suits beside smiling board members and community leaders. He looks like the ideal modern figure of success, wealthy, polished, civic-minded, and fully in command of his life. But image always leaves something out. What the public cannot see is how deeply Roman depends on control. He dislikes uncertainty. He dislikes emotional confusion. He dislikes situations that do not respond to pressure, logic, or strategy. Even when he appears calm, there is often a tightness underneath, a need for order strong enough to shape how he moves through every part of life. Still, from the outside, he looks complete, a handsome billionaire, a powerful name, a man used to being admired, which is exactly why Serafina's lack of performance around him catches his attention so quickly. Serafina meets Roman on a night built on polished smiles, social calculation, and quiet competition. The gala takes place in one of Chicago's grand historic hotels, a place filled with warm light, marble floors, and people dressed as if they expect to be noticed. Donors move from table to table. Executives speak in low voices over crystal glasses. Names carry weight. Appearances matter. Every conversation seems to hold a second purpose beneath it. Serafina is there to work. Her firm is handling communications for one of the non-profit boards attached to the event, and from the moment she arrives, she is occupied with details that other people overlook until those details become problems. A sponsor packet is misprinted. A seating arrangement creates tension between two major donors. A nervous junior staff member nearly sends the wrong note to a journalist. Serafina moves through each issue with quiet speed, never dramatic, never flustered. She wears a black dress that fits the room without asking the room to center her. Her attention stays on the task, not the audience. Roman notices her before he speaks to her. He arrives late, as expected, and his entrance causes the usual shift. Heads turn. Conversations pause. A few people brighten too quickly, eager to catch his attention. Roman greets the right people, shakes the right hands, and moves with the confidence of a man who has spent years being watched in rooms like this. He is already halfway through the evening in his mind when he sees her near the edge of the ballroom, correcting an issue with the event program while giving calm instructions to hotel staff. She does not look at him. That alone catches his attention. Later, a minor seating adjustment places them briefly near one another. Roman makes a polished remark about city development, the sort of comment most people would reward with easy agreement. Serafina glances at him and asks in a steady voice whether he builds to improve neighborhoods or merely to improve headlines. Roman pauses, not because he is offended, but because he is surprised. There is no flirtation in her tone, no attempt to impress him by sounding bold. She asks because she wants a real answer. He gives one. She responds with a thoughtful point about community trust, public memory, and how people know the difference between investment and image management. For the first time that night, Roman stops performing. He studies her more closely. She holds herself with calm confidence, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the deeper kind that comes from knowing her own mind. She does not flatter him. She does not shrink from him. She speaks to him as if his name has no power over the truth. That is rare in his world. Before the evening ends, Roman finds her again in the hallway near the event offices. He asks her to dinner. Serafina looks at him carefully, as if deciding whether this is sincerity or habit. Then, she says, yes. He leaves the gala with her number. She leaves with a curiosity she does not fully admit. What begins with curiosity soon settles into something deeper, something neither of them tries to name too quickly. Roman takes Serafina to dinner a few days after the gala. She expects polish, and he gives her that. The restaurant is private, elegant, and discreet, the kind of place where wealthy men conduct serious conversations without fear of being overheard. But what stays with her is not the setting. It is the way Roman listens. He does not talk over her. He does not fill every silence with stories about himself. He asks real questions about her work, her parents, and the life she built before he ever entered it. When she answers, he pays attention in a way that feels focused, almost rare. Most men with his level of influence perform interest because they are used to being admired. Roman, at least in those early weeks, seems relieved by honesty. That is what begins to draw Serafina in. Their connection grows in private spaces, not public ones. Evening drives, after charity events, walks along the river when Chicago air turns sharp and cold. Early breakfasts before her workday begins. Quiet moments in his penthouse where he sets his phone aside and lets conversation breathe instead of forcing it. Around her, he appears less guarded. He speaks about pressure, about expectations, about what it means to inherit a public name and spend years trying to prove he deserves it. Serafina sees the man beneath the headlines. She sees that Roman is most at ease when he feels no need to impress. He has enough charm to light up a crowded room, but in private he seems tired of being watched. With her, he relaxes in small ways. His shoulders loosen, his voice softens, he smiles more easily. He remembers things she says in passing and brings them back later without effort. The tea she prefers on cold evenings. The old novels she loves. The fact that she trusts consistency more than grand words. His affection is gentle then, a hand resting at the small of her back as they leave a restaurant. A forehead kiss when she falls asleep beside him after a long week. Fingers brushing hers beneath a table while a room full of people carries on around them. The closeness between them does not feel rushed. It feels chosen. Quiet, steady, and sincere. Serafina begins to believe she has found something rare. Roman does not seem drawn to her because she fits his image. He seems drawn to her because she makes him feel understood without flattering him. She challenges him when needed. She steadies him without making him feel managed. In a world where many people want access to him, she offers clarity instead. That becomes the center of their bond. There are signs, even then, that his care carries a need to hold tightly. He likes to know when she gets home. He offers drivers when she works late. He grows quiet when certain men at her firm contact her after hours. Still, in those early days, it looks close to devotion. Protective, focused, deeply invested. And because the tenderness is real, Serafina does not question the edges of it yet. She only knows that little by little, her life is beginning to make room for him. By the time Roman decides to ask Serafina to marry him, their relationship already carries the quiet rhythm of two lives leaning toward the same future. He knows enough about her by then to understand one thing clearly. She would hate a public proposal built for spectacle. She would smile through it if she had to. But he knows she values meaning more than display. So for once, he plans something shaped less by wealth and more by memory. Months earlier, during a late evening walk, Serafina had mentioned her love for old books and historic spaces. She said places like that made her feel as though some things could survive time if people cared for them properly. Roman remembers the line, "He stores details the way other men store numbers." So he chooses the library of a restored historic hotel, closed to the public for the evening. The room is warm, lined with shelves, soft lamplight, and the quiet dignity of old wood and leather-bound volumes. No crowd, no hidden audience, no photographers waiting for the perfect reaction. Only stillness, care, and intention. When Serafina walks in, she knows at once this night matters. Roman stands near the far end of the room, composed on the surface, though there is a tension in him she has not seen before. It touches her, because it feels honest. Here is the man who commands meetings, influences deals, and walks through the city as though pressure bends around him. Yet standing before her now, he looks almost uncertain. When he begins speaking, he does not mention his wealth, his name, or the life he can offer in material terms. He speaks about truth, about how much of his world feels managed, polished, and guarded, about how she has never treated him like a title, a prize, or a project. He tells her she has become the one person with whom he feels no need to perform strength. He says peace has become easier to imagine with her in his life. Then he asks her to marry him. Serafina says yes with tears in her eyes, and a smile she does not even try to hide. For a while, the joy feels untouched. Their engagement spreads quickly through business circles and society pages. The city loves the story. A powerful billionaire developer and a self-made communications strategist. Wealth and grace. Public force and private composure. At events, they are photographed together as though they were designed for admiration. Serafina handles attention with calm elegance. Roman seems proud to have her beside him. Their wedding becomes one of the season's biggest social events. It is beautiful, refined, and expensive without looking careless. Important guests fill the room. Cameras flash. Flowers, music, polished tables, and tailored vows create the sort of setting people speak about for months. Serafina looks radiant, not because of the luxury around her, but because she believes she is stepping into a partnership built on respect. Roman looks certain, focused, and deeply moved as he watches her walk toward him. From the outside, they seem perfect. Inside that perfection, Serafina carries a simpler hope. She believes she has found a man whose public hardness ends where private love begins. She believes marriage will give them a deeper version of the trust they already share. She believes the life before them will be demanding, yes, but honest. Standing beside Roman on their wedding day, she does not see danger. She sees a future, and she gives her heart to it fully. In the first months after their wedding, Serafina lets herself believe she has entered the kind of marriage people quietly hope for, but rarely find. The penthouse does not feel cold. Then, it feels new. Morning light spills across the glass walls and settles over white stone floors, polished wood, and carefully chosen art. Fresh flowers sit near the windows. Soft music moves through the kitchen, while coffee warms the air. The place feels less like a display and more like a beginning. Serafina walks through it with a growing sense of belonging, as though love has finally met the life she spent years building on her own. Roman helps create that feeling. He is still busy, still powerful, still constantly needed by people outside their home, but in those early months he makes room for tenderness. Before leaving for work, he kisses her forehead or lingers long enough to ask what meetings she has that day. At dinner, he listens when she speaks about clients, public pressure, or ideas she has been carrying quietly for years. Sometimes he asks for her thoughts on statements his team is preparing. He respects her instincts, and that matters to her more than the luxury around them. For a while, the rhythm works. They move through Chicago as a couple people admire on sight. At charity dinners, private receptions, and public events, they appear balanced in a way that draws attention without effort. Roman brings force, ambition, and the certainty of a man used to influence. Serafina brings restraint, elegance, and calm. Together, they look composed, deliberate, and deeply suited to one another. Society pages describe them in polished language. Friends comment on how well they complement each other. Even strangers seem to read meaning into the way Roman's hand rests at her back, or the way Serafina looks toward him when he speaks. At first, those public impressions do not feel false. In private, there is still warmth beneath the image. On quieter nights, they sit by the window with dinner between them and talk about the future. Roman speaks about legacy, expansion, and building things that will outlast him. Serafina talks about purpose, community, and one day creating opportunities for young women who lack the access many powerful people take for granted. He listens seriously. She admires that. It makes her feel seen beyond beauty, beyond charm, beyond the role of a wife standing gracefully beside a billionaire husband. There is romance too, but not in an excessive way. It lives in late dinners after long days, in shared glances across crowded rooms, in weekends where they drive out of the city and seem to recover softer versions of themselves, in the quiet moment before sleep, when Roman reaches for her like he trusts her presence to ease the weight of his mind. Serafina holds tightly to those moments. They convince her the marriage rests on something real, not spectacle, not status, something steadier. Looking back, she will understand these months as the polished beginning that often makes later damage harder to accept. At the time, she sees only promise, and promise, when wrapped in beauty and affection, can make even the future look safe. The shift begins quietly enough for Serafina to mistake it for a difficult season instead of a warning. Not long after their marriage settles into routine, Roman takes on one of the biggest projects of his career, a major lakefront development tied to enormous money, public visibility, and political pressure. The project is ambitious, expensive, and full of people who want results faster than reality will allow. Investors push for speed. City officials demand reassurance. Reporters revisit older criticism connected to past land disputes. Every week seems to bring a new complication, and Roman starts carrying the weight of all of it, like a man who believes pressure is something he should be able to master through sheer force. At first, Serafina responds with patience. She shortens dinners when his meetings run late. She reviews statements when his communications team falls behind. She helps him think through public messaging, reminds him to eat, and tries to create small islands of calm inside a schedule that keeps tightening around him. She tells herself, this is what marriage looks like when life becomes demanding. You make room, you stay steady. You do not panic at the first signs of strain. Roman still appreciates her then, but something in him has begun to change. His gratitude becomes shorter. His attention feels split, even when he is sitting across from her. He takes calls during meals, checks email in the middle of conversations, and wakes in the middle of the night with his mind already somewhere else. The exhaustion in him is real, but it brings a harder edge with it. Small inconveniences irritate him more than they used to. Delays seem to offend him personally. A harmless question asked at the wrong moment can earn a cold look or a clipped answer sharp enough to end the conversation. Serafina notices his tone before she fully understands the deeper shift. He is not shouting. He is not openly cruel. That makes it easier to excuse. Still, she feels the difference. When she offers practical advice, he sometimes accuses her of speaking like a consultant instead of a wife. When she stays quiet to avoid adding pressure, he asks why she seems distant. On some nights he returns home so tense that the apartment changes the moment he enters it, as if his mood reaches every room before his voice does. She keeps hoping for the earlier version of him to return. And sometimes he does. A tired smile after a brutal day. A soft apology. A quiet hand reaching for hers in bed after hours of distance. Those moments blur the truth. They let her believe the stress is temporary, and the man she trusts is merely buried beneath it for now. But pressure does more than test people. It reveals the habits they fall back on when life stops obeying them. Roman's world has always been built on control, on outcomes, timing, leverage, and the confidence that enough force can bend most things into place. Now he is facing problems that do not move that way, and Serafina can feel something restless building in him because of it. Love is still there, but stress has started altering its shape. And the man who once came home to rest in her presence is beginning to come home looking for somewhere to place his frustration instead. At first, Roman's concern still looks enough like love for Serafina to trust it. He asks when she gets home after late work events. He offers a driver if meetings run into the evening. He notices when she seems tired, remembers details about her schedule, and checks in with the kind of focus many women might describe as devotion. To anyone watching from the outside, it would appear thoughtful, protective even. And because Serafina loves him, she accepts those gestures in the generous spirit they seem to carry. The problem is not how it begins. The problem is how slowly it changes. One evening, a male client calls her direct line after hours about a time-sensitive issue. Roman's expression hardens almost at once. He asks why the office line is not enough. Serafina laughs lightly and tells him it is part of the job. He says nothing more, but the room turns cold. The rest of the night passes in a silence so deliberate it feels less like mood and more like punishment. 2 days later, flowers arrive. A week after that, a co-worker texts late about a media problem at the firm. Roman notices. His questions sound casual at first, but not quite. Who is he? Why is he writing this late? Does this kind of thing happen often? Serafina answers simply, then stops, unsettled by how much she suddenly feels she is explaining something harmless. That becomes the pattern. The issue itself is small. His reaction is not. If she challenges his tone, he withdraws. If she tells him he is overthinking, he becomes colder. Then comes the repair. A gift, a softened apology, a dinner reservation, a weekend away. Enough warmth to blur the discomfort that came before it. Serafina begins adjusting without meaning to. She replies to certain messages faster when she knows Roman is watching. She gives context he did not ask for yet, simply to prevent tension before it starts. She chooses her words more carefully, measures her tone, and starts scanning his face before deciding whether a topic feels safe enough to raise. None of this happens in one dramatic moment. That is why it reaches so deep before she fully names it. Roman does not need to shout to shape the atmosphere around him. His disappointment does enough. That is what begins creating distance between them. Not a loud collapse, but a steady erosion of ease. Serafina still sees flashes of tenderness in him. He still takes her hand in public. He still looks at her some nights, with the same intensity that once made her feel cherished. But now those moments sit beside something else, something tighter and more watchful. Love is still present, but it is no longer simple. And little by little, Serafina starts feeling that she is not only being loved anymore, she is being managed. What makes this stage of Serafina's marriage so painful is not only the hurt itself, it is the fact that the hurt arrives in pieces, each one small enough to question, small enough to excuse, small enough to survive without calling it what it is. If Roman had changed all at once, Serafina would have seen it clearly. If he had become openly cruel in a single week, if his voice had risen, if his affection had vanished without warning, if he had stopped pretending care mattered, she would have had something obvious to confront. But this is harder. He is still affectionate sometimes. He is still attentive, in public. He still knows how to soften after he has gone cold. That keeps hope alive longer than truth should allow. Serafina starts living between two versions of the same man. One is the man she fell in love with. The man who listened when she spoke, remembered details others missed, and looked relieved whenever she offered honesty instead of performance. The man who once made her feel safe enough to lower her guard completely. The other is the man she is now learning to navigate. The man whose questions no longer feel simple. The man whose silence has weight. The man who can shift the mood of an entire evening with one hard look, one clipped response, one refusal to explain what is wrong while making her feel it anyway. That contrast keeps her confused. She holds on to the softer version of him so tightly that she starts doubting her own discomfort. She tells herself he is under pressure. She tells herself marriage requires patience. She tells herself all strong relationships go through seasons that feel uneven. But even as she says these things, her body is learning something her mind is still trying to delay. She is becoming more careful, more alert, more watchful. She is adapting to tension before she has fully admitted how much of it now fills her home. That is how love changes slowly. Not with one obvious break, but with repeated moments that teach one person to manage the emotional weather created by the other. One silence here, one sharp question there. One apology wrapped in charm. One good evening that makes 3 bad ones feel easier to forgive. Over time, confusion becomes routine, and routine becomes the cage people call commitment because the bars are hard to see from the outside. Serafina still loves Roman. That is what makes this stage so difficult. She is not trying to escape a man she stopped caring about. She is trying to understand how a man she still loves can keep making her feel smaller inside a life that looks perfect to everyone else. Have you ever seen love change this slowly? Have you ever watched something beautiful lose its warmth little by little until you barely recognize what it had become? Tell me in the comments. Like this video if this story is pulling you in, and subscribe to the channel because the pain inside this marriage is only beginning to show its full cost. The penthouse remains beautiful. That is part of what makes the change inside it so lonely. The windows still open onto a sweeping view of Chicago. The floors still shine under morning light. The art remains perfectly placed. Guests still enter with admiration in their eyes, pausing near the glass to praise the skyline, the design, the elegance of a life that appears calm, elevated, and complete. Nothing visible announces that peace has started leaving the place room by room. But Serafina feels it every day. She notices it in the seconds before Roman comes home, when she hears the quiet sound of the elevator and instinctively straightens, not from excitement anymore, but from caution. She notices it in the way she studies his face before choosing a subject. If his jaw is tight, she keeps things light. If his silence feels heavier than usual, she says less. If he seems irritated before he even sets his keys down, she already knows dinner will pass under a strain neither of them will name. Home no longer feels like rest. It feels like management. The same living room where they once shared quiet meals now feels unpredictable. Some nights Roman sits beside her distracted but civil, answering questions in short replies while his mind stays fixed on work. Other nights, one harmless comment from her seems to land wrong, and the room changes. He does not have to speak loudly. He does not have to insult her directly. His tension spreads fast enough on its own. The apartment grows quieter, colder, less forgiving. Serafina starts choosing silence simply because silence feels safer than misreading his mood. That is the shift she cannot ignore. The danger is not physical. It is emotional. It is the loss of ease, the loss of trust in ordinary conversation, the loss of knowing that the person you love will meet your vulnerability with care instead of strain. A home becomes unsafe long before anyone outside would ever call it broken. It becomes unsafe when one person starts shrinking inside it. When peace depends too much on timing, tone, and avoiding the wrong word at the wrong moment. Serafina still stands at the window sometimes, looking down at the city lights, remembering how this place once felt like the start of a strong future. She had imagined children there, holiday mornings, shared routines, deepening with time. She had imagined a life where beauty held warmth inside it. Instead, she is learning how easily beauty can hide discomfort when the people inside it stop protecting each other. Roman still expects the penthouse to feel like refuge after his long days. He still wants understanding, softness, and quiet when he comes home. But he brings his pressure in with him, and leaves it in every room. The apartment may still impress strangers, but strangers do not sleep there. Strangers do not measure the air before they speak. From the outside, Serafina's home still looks enviable. Inside, it is becoming a place where she no longer knows how to fully exhale. For a while, the idea of a child brings Serafina and Roman closer in a way that feels gentle, almost healing. It does not begin with pressure. It begins with possibility. One rainy Sunday afternoon, while the city outside their windows looks grey and far away, Roman stands in the spare room at the end of the hallway and studies it with unusual softness in his face. The room is empty except for pale walls, a tall window, and the quiet stillness of a space waiting to become something. Serafina finds him there, with his sleeves rolled up and a sample card of paint shades in his hand. He looks at her and smiles, not the polished smile he gives strangers, but the quieter one he once wore more often. "What do you think about cream?" he asks. "Something warm, nothing too bright." Serafina laughs, surprised. "You are already choosing colors?" Roman shrugs, though the affection in his eyes gives him away. "I like being prepared." It is one of the first times in months that his planning feels sweet rather than controlling. She leans against the doorway and imagines it with him. A crib near the wall, books on a shelf, a soft chair by the window, their child sleeping just a few steps from their room while city lights blink beyond the glass. The image touches something deep inside her. Later, he does paint the room, though only one wall before deciding he should wait until they know for certain. Serafina watches him work with careful strokes and a level of attention that reminds her of the man she married, the one who once made her feel that building a life together would be a joy, not a negotiation. Those early months carry hope like a quiet light. They speak in low voices about names they like, but pretend not to be seriously considering yet. They pause near baby clothes in stores, both of them smiling at things too small to seem real. One evening, Serafina buys a tiny cream-colored sweater on impulse, then blushes when Roman finds it folded in a shopping bag. Instead of teasing her, he lifts it gently and holds it in both hands as though it already belongs to someone important. "We are going to need this," he says. She wants to believe him with her whole heart. In bed, they talk about the future with the kind of softness that had been fading from their marriage. Roman speaks about teaching a child how to move through the world with confidence. Serafina speaks about warmth, steadiness, and raising someone who feels loved before they feel judged. He listens closely. She feels seen again. The subject of a family seems to bring out a tenderness in him that she had been missing. For a while, it even improves the atmosphere at home. The tension in him eases on certain nights. He comes home and pulls her close in the kitchen. He asks about her day without distraction. He rests a hand against her stomach in passing, not dramatically, just with quiet hope. In those moments, Serafina lets herself believe that a shared dream might restore something they have started to lose. Trying for a child becomes more than a private wish. It becomes a promise they are building toward together. And because the hope feels so sincere, neither of them yet understands how painful it will be when that promise refuses to arrive on the timeline they imagined. At first, the waiting feels manageable. Serafina tells herself these things take time. Roman says the same, though not always with the same calm tone. They count weeks quietly, exchange hopeful looks without making too much of them, and move through each month with a private optimism that feels fragile but alive. In the beginning, disappointment does not land like disaster. It lands like delay, an inconvenience, a sadness they can absorb because they still believe next month might be different. But hope becomes harder to carry when it keeps returning empty-handed. The first few disappointments leave Serafina quiet for an evening, then steady again by morning. Roman kisses her temple, tells her not to worry, and tries to frame patience as strength. She wants to believe patience is enough. She wants to believe love and time will eventually meet in the middle. Then, the months keep passing. Seasons begin changing around them. The cream wall in the spare room remains untouched. The tiny sweater stays folded in a drawer. Serafina stops pausing near baby clothes in stores because she can no longer bear the ache that follows. Roman no longer mentions names. He passes the spare room without stopping. What began as hope slowly becomes a cycle of guarded expectation and private loss. Serafina feels it most in the quiet moments no one else sees. Standing alone in the bathroom with her hand braced against the sink, sitting at the edge of the bed after another month slips away, opening a drawer and catching sight of that tiny sweater before closing it again too quickly. She grieves in a restrained way because even her sadness feels delicate now, something she is afraid to place fully into the room in case it makes Roman retreat deeper into himself. Roman handles disappointment differently. He grows impatient with uncertainty. He wants reasons, explanations, answers. He begins asking sharper questions, not of her at first, but of life itself, of timing, of whatever invisible force keeps refusing to give them what they want. When hope is high, he becomes attentive. When disappointment returns, something hard settles over him. He works later, speaks less, sleeps poorly. His grief does not look like tears. It looks like tension. That difference between them deepens the distance neither wants to name. Serafina becomes more careful with her emotions, because Roman seems unable to hold both his own pain and hers at the same time. If she cries, he grows uncomfortable. If she stays strong, he mistakes it for ease. So she starts carrying more of the grief inside herself. She learns how to smile through charity events while feeling hollow. She learns how to answer harmless questions from friends about the future without letting her face reveal how much the subject already hurts. Each month begins with hope and ends with silence. That repetition wears them down more than either of them admits. The dream that once brought tenderness into the marriage now brings a private kind of sorrow. It changes the way they move around each other. It changes the air in the bedroom. It changes the future from something open and bright into something that feels increasingly uncertain. Grief arrives slowly, but once it settles in, it changes the shape of everything. And for Serafina, the hardest part is not only wanting a child, it is watching disappointment turn the man she loves into someone harder to reach with every passing month. Eventually, hope alone no longer feels responsible enough to carry the weight of their uncertainty. That is how doctors enter the marriage. The first appointment is almost reassuring in its normalcy. A clean office, soft voices, simple questions asked with professional calm. Timing, cycles, stress levels, sleep, medical history. Serafina answers carefully. Roman sits beside her, controlled and attentive, one hand resting on his knee, his face unreadable except for the tightness at his jaw whenever the conversation pauses too long. They leave with general advice, a few tests, and a promise that nothing sounds alarming yet. For a short time, that helps. It gives them something practical to hold on to, some framework beyond private guessing. Serafina tells herself structure might ease the emotional strain. Roman seems relieved by the idea that specialists, data, and clear steps might lead them back toward certainty. But medicine does not offer certainty as quickly as Roman expects. One appointment becomes several: blood work, follow-up visits, timed calendars. More questions asked in rooms that smell faintly of paper, disinfectant, and quiet sympathy. The language used by the doctors is careful, balanced, and clinical. More monitoring, more observation, nothing final yet. Many couples take time. Stress matters. Bodies are complex. Outcomes are not always immediate. Serafina hears patience in those words. Roman hears delay. Every visit leaves behind a residue that follows them home. On the elevator ride down from the clinic, they stand side by side with too much on their minds and too little to say. In the car, silence fills the space where comfort should be. The pressure grows, not because anyone has delivered a cruel answer, but because each appointment reminds them that what they want cannot be summoned by love, discipline, or financial power. That truth unsettles Roman deeply. He begins approaching each visit as if the next one must finally give him something definite. When it does not, frustration rises in him like heat trapped beneath a sealed surface. He grows impatient with phrases like, "We need more time," and "let us continue to monitor." Serafina tries to slow him, reminding him that the doctors are being careful, not evasive. He nods sometimes, but his face tells a different story. He wants the problem located, named, and solved. He wants movement. He wants control. The visits also affect Serafina in ways she does not fully speak aloud. She starts feeling observed in a deeply personal part of her life. Ordinary closeness is replaced by calendars and timing. Hope becomes tied to appointments and lab results. Her body, once simply hers, now feels drawn into an ongoing conversation filled with questions, evaluations, and probabilities. Even when the doctors are kind, the process leaves her feeling exposed. What makes it harder is that the appointments stop feeling like something they are going through together. They begin to feel like rooms where hidden fears quietly take shape. Roman grows more intense after each visit. Serafina grows more inward. They still sit side by side, still drive home together, still speak in measured voices when necessary. But strain is building. The kind that does not need shouting to be felt. The kind that follows them from clinic chairs to bedroom silence to dinners where neither person knows how much truth the other can handle. The pressure is no longer only about wanting a child. It is about what uncertainty is beginning to reveal in both of them. Serafina grows quieter, while Roman grows harsher. The strain does not break them in one visible moment. It changes them by degrees. Serafina, who once spoke openly about her feelings when the marriage still felt safe, begins saying less. She does not become cold. She becomes careful. There is a difference. She still loves Roman. She still wants peace between them. But repeated disappointment, endless waiting, and the rising tension after every doctor visit teach her that not every emotion can survive being spoken aloud in front of him anymore. So she keeps more inside. When she feels sad, she grieves privately. When she feels afraid, she folds the fear inward and carries it through her day with a composed face. She stops sharing every passing thought about the future, because too many of those thoughts now lead to silence, discomfort, or an answer from Roman that feels more sharp than soothing. She tells herself she is protecting the marriage from more stress. In truth, she is also protecting herself from the loneliness of reaching for comfort and not receiving it. Roman changes too, but in the opposite direction. He grows harsher, though not always in obvious ways. It begins in tone, a clipped answer, a tired sigh, a look that says he has no patience left for another emotional conversation. Then it moves into the way he reacts to uncertainty itself. He becomes shorter with staff, less forgiving with delays, more irritated by things that would once have passed without comment. And because the child's struggle has reached a place he cannot command or solve, frustration begins leaking into the marriage with increasing force. Serafina notices that he no longer asks how she is feeling in the same way. He asks for updates. He asks practical questions. He asks what the doctor said, what comes next, what needs to be done. But emotional presence is becoming harder for him. When she needs softness, he offers analysis. When she needs shared grief, he offers tension. When she needs reassurance, he sometimes answers with his own fear dressed up as logic. That is what makes the distance between them grow so quickly. They are still living in the same home, sleeping in the same bed, moving through the same routines. Yet their pain is no longer meeting in the middle. Serafina absorbs hers until it turns quiet. Roman pushes his outward until it hardens the air around him. On some nights she watches him pacing near the windows with a drink in his hand and realizes he is no longer only disappointed by what they are facing. He is angry at the fact that he cannot force life to answer him. Her silence deepens because his mood leaves so little room for her tenderness. His harshness deepens because her quiet begins to feel, to him, like distance he cannot interpret. Neither of them says that out loud, but both of them feel it. And that is how a couple can begin losing each other long before love itself disappears. Not through a lack of feeling, but through pain that each person carries in a form the other no longer knows how to hold. Serafina becomes quieter because the marriage no longer feels soft enough for her grief. Roman becomes harsher because his grief refuses to remain hidden. And between those two changes, the space once filled by trust begins thinning day by day. What had once felt natural between them slowly becomes burdened by meaning, In the earlier days of their marriage, physical closeness had been one of the places where Serafina felt Roman soften most completely. In quiet moments, away from business pressure and public performance, he had touched her with tenderness that made her feel chosen, not managed. Their closeness had carried affection, playfulness, rest. It had been a place where words were not always needed, because trust did enough work on its own. Now trust is under strain, and intimacy changes with it. The shift is subtle at first. A little more calculation, a little less ease. A quiet awareness of timing hovering over moments that should have belonged only to them. What had once been spontaneous begins feeling scheduled in the back of both their minds, even when neither says so directly. Serafina notices how hope enters the room before either of them does. Roman notices it too. That makes everything heavier. She starts dreading the emotional weight attached to something that used to feel like comfort. Not because she no longer wants closeness with him, but because every tender moment now seems followed by expectation. If hope rises, fear rises with it. If they reach for each other and another month still ends in disappointment, the sorrow feels sharper because it has touched one of the most private parts of their marriage. Roman feels the pressure differently. The more uncertain the future becomes, the more intense he seems afterward, as if he is measuring success and failure in silence. Serafina can feel it in the way he holds himself, in the heaviness that follows, in the quiet frustration he rarely names directly. She begins sensing that what should join them is also beginning to expose his fear, his need for control, and the private shame gathering in him every time life does not respond. That realization hurts her deeply, because intimacy should be the place where two people feel safest, not the place where grief becomes hardest to escape. Still, she tries. She reaches for him on nights when part of her wants only to sleep. She keeps her face soft when she feels sad. She tells herself closeness matters, that love must not be allowed to disappear beneath pressure. Yet, the emotional cost keeps rising. Afterwards, she often lies awake, staring into the dark, feeling both near him and terribly alone. Roman senses her caution, and instead of asking what it means, he seems troubled by it. The result is a painful cycle. Her carefulness makes him feel the distance. His frustration makes her even more careful. Neither of them knows how to step outside that pattern without naming the grief they both keep carrying in different forms. So, their intimacy remains, but changed, still tender at times, still real, but threaded with sadness, fear, and a growing exhaustion that neither romance nor good intentions can fully hide. What once restored them now often leaves them quiet. What once made them feel close now sometimes leaves them more aware of what is missing. That is one of the cruelest parts of prolonged disappointment. It reaches into the very spaces where love once felt strongest and makes even those spaces heavy to enter. Serafina does not stop loving Roman, but she begins to understand that love alone cannot protect a marriage when pain has entered every doorway, even the most private one. Long before Serafina ever hears Celeste's name spoken by anyone else, she feels the shape of it inside her marriage. It is not a presence in the obvious sense. There are no framed photos of Roman's first marriage in the penthouse, no long stories told over dinner, no bitter speeches about betrayal or regret. Roman is too disciplined for that. He keeps his past arranged the way he keeps every uncomfortable thing in life, locked behind polished silence and controlled phrasing. But silence has weight, and Serafina is the kind of woman who notices what people avoid with more care than what they willingly reveal. She first understands this during the early part of their courtship, when the subject of previous relationships comes up with natural ease. She tells him about one brief relationship from her 20s, nothing dramatic, just a lesson in misalignment and bad timing. Roman listens without visible discomfort. He does not react with jealousy or judgment. He only nods and asks one or two thoughtful questions. Then she asks, gently, about his own history. That is the first time she sees his face go still. Not angry, not defensive in any loud way, just closed. He says he was married once. It ended quickly. They wanted different things. It was better for both of them to move on. His voice is calm, clipped, and exact, as if the subject has already been shortened for efficiency before it ever reaches the listener. Serafina does not push. She respects privacy. She knows people are entitled to old pain without being forced to display it for reassurance. Still, one sentence stays with her. Roman looks down at his glass and says, "She made everything feel like a test, and somehow I was always failing one I did not know I was taking." He does not explain further. At the time, Serafina takes the line as emotional shorthand for incompatibility, perhaps manipulation, perhaps exhaustion. She assumes the marriage was messy, in the ordinary way. Unsuccessful marriages often are. Two people with strong personalities, too much pressure, too little trust. The sort of history polished people bury because public life rewards control, not confession. After their wedding, the absence of Celeste becomes more noticeable than the subject itself. If an old family friend comes too close to the topic, Roman changes direction without seeming abrupt. If a guest casually mentions how difficult first marriages can be, he smiles thinly and moves on. Once, during the first year of their marriage, a storage box is brought up from one of the building's secure units. Serafina helps sort old papers and event photos until she pulls free an image from years earlier. She sees only part of it at first: a beach, bright light, Roman younger than he is now, and the edge of a woman's hand linked with his. Roman takes the photo from her too quickly. Not violently, not harshly, but fast enough for the moment to leave a mark. He says it is nothing important, and places it in a separate pile he later removes from the room entirely. That tells Serafina more than any long explanation would have. Celeste is not simply an ex-wife. She is a sealed room inside Roman's life, a room he refuses to open because something in it still has the power to unsettle him. Serafina senses that the first marriage did not merely end, it injured him in some place deeper than pride, and he has spent years refusing to let air reach the wound. At this stage, she still believes that love, patience, and time can coexist with mystery. She does not yet understand that unhealed silence has a way of returning when life presses against the very place where the old damage was first made. The first real crack in the silence comes at a winter charity auction, in the kind of room where secrets rarely stay private forever, only dressed in better clothing. The event is hosted in a historic Chicago hotel, dressed for the season with gold light, white florals, soft music, and tables full of polished donors who know how to smile while studying one another's weaknesses. Serafina attends at Roman's side, composed as always in a dark satin gown that draws admiration without asking for it. Roman is in one of his sharper public moods that night, controlled, courteous, every inch the powerful man people expect him to be. He speaks with board members, shakes hands, and takes praise with the smooth restraint that makes others admire him more. To anyone watching, they look flawless. Yet Serafina already knows how false appearances can be. At one point in the evening, after a round of greetings and donor small talk that leaves her wanting air, she steps away toward the corridor near the coat check. The hallway is quieter there, removed from the applause and low conversation rolling through the ballroom. She reaches for a glass of water from a service tray left near the wall and pauses when she hears two women speaking nearby in lowered voices. She recognizes neither of them closely, though both wear the polished ease of women who move often through the city's wealthy circles. Their tone is casual at first, the sort of social whisper that thrives on being half careless and half calculated. One mentions Celeste by name. Serafina stills without meaning to. The second woman sighs and says Roman always looked damaged after that marriage. The first answers, "After what happened with the baby rumor, I am not surprised." Serafina does not move. The words settle into her like cold water. Baby rumor. Nothing in Roman's carefully limited account of his first marriage ever suggested a child, a pregnancy, or anything close to it. Yet the phrase lands with the weight of something once known, once discussed, once sharp enough to leave residue behind in other people's memory. Before she can fully process it, one of the women glances up and notices her standing there. Both go silent at once. One smiles too brightly. The other busies herself with a shawl she was not adjusting a second earlier. In an instant, the conversation changes shape. Compliments about the event. Something about the flowers. A polite retreat into social nonsense that only confirms the lines Serafina was never supposed to hear. She returns to the ballroom, but nothing around her feels the same. Roman is across the room, laughing softly at something an investor has said, one hand in his pocket, his posture easy, his face composed. Serafina watches him with new eyes, not distrust yet, more like sharpened attention. She begins replaying old moments she once dismissed. The storage photo removed too quickly. The strange finality in his voice, whenever his first marriage surfaces. The line about always failing some test he did not understand. Now another thought joins them. What baby rumor? The auction continues. Bids rise. Glasses clink. Names are announced. Roman returns to her side and rests a hand lightly against her back, as if nothing in the world has shifted. Serafina keeps her face calm because years of social training and professional discipline have taught her how to hold a room together while her mind is moving elsewhere. But inside, a question has begun opening, and once a question reaches the right wound, it rarely stays quiet for long. Serafina waits until they are home to ask, not because she is afraid of Roman's reaction, not yet, but because she values dignity too much to turn an overheard whisper into a public confrontation. She lets the ride back pass in measured silence. Roman answers 2 emails from the back seat, glances once at the skyline, and says almost nothing. By the time they enter the penthouse, the city is deep in winter stillness, the lights below them cold and distant. Roman loosens his tie and heads toward the kitchen for water. Serafina removes her earrings slowly, more to steady herself than from need. She knows timing matters with him. She knows tone matters even more. So when she speaks, she does it gently. There is something I want to ask you. Roman glances over. About what? She keeps her voice even. About Celeste. The effect is immediate, not dramatic, not explosive, but immediate. His face does not harden all at once. It closes. A careful, contained shift passes through him, the way a door shuts softly but with final force. He sets the glass down without drinking. What about her? Serafina chooses honesty over caution. She has built too much of her life on truth to start circling it now. I overheard something tonight. 2 women in the hallway were talking. One mentioned a baby rumor connected to your first marriage. For a long second, Roman says nothing. Then very quietly he asks, "Who said that?" The question is wrong, in a way she feels instantly. Not, "What do you mean?" Not, "Where did you hear it?" Not, "There is nothing to explain." His first instinct is to locate the leak, not the wound. "I did not recognize them," Serafina says. "That is not the point." His jaw tightens. People say a lot of things in rooms like that. So it was not true. Roman turns away and reaches again for the glass, though he still does not drink. It was nonsense. The answer lands too fast, too smooth, too prepared. Serafina steps closer. "Roman, I am not asking because I enjoy gossip. I am asking because I am your wife," and that line did not sound like random talk. He exhales through his nose, visibly irritated now. "It was years ago. It does not matter. It matters if it still affects you." That is the line that changes him. He turns back toward her with a coldness that feels less like anger and more like refusal. "I said it was nothing you need to concern yourself with. Nothing you need to concern yourself with." The sentence cuts deeper than the words themselves should. Serafina is not some outsider asking for access to his private archives. She is the woman sharing his home, his bed, his future. Yet in that moment, he speaks as though his pain belongs to a locked territory where even marriage grants no entry. She studies him, trying to decide whether this is shame, fear, or plain control. "Roman," she says more softly, "if there was something painful there, I would rather hear it from you than from a hallway whisper." His voice drops lower. "Then stop listening to hallway whispers." The room goes quiet. He picks up his glass and walks toward the windows, ending the conversation with posture alone. No explanation, no reassurance, no effort to soften what just happened. Serafina stays where she is, staring at his back, feeling the first real sting of something she has not yet named. This is not ordinary privacy. This is defense. And defense this strong usually protects something that still has power. After the conversation in the penthouse, Serafina tries to leave the matter alone. at least outwardly. She does not bring up the baby rumor again right away. She does not search through old records or ask mutual friends loaded questions over lunch. She tells herself that if Roman needs time, he will come to her when he is ready. But patience has never stopped observation, and Serafina's mind is far too disciplined to ignore a pattern once it begins to reveal itself. In the weeks that follow, small moments start pressing together in ways they had not before. A former college friend of Roman's joins them briefly at a private dinner after a development event. The conversation stays harmless until the friend says, with the careless tone people use when they assume old history has cooled, "You are much lighter now than after the first divorce. That period nearly buried you." Roman's expression changes so quickly most people at the table would miss it. Serafina does not. He smiles, but only with his mouth. The warmth disappears from his eyes. He redirects the topic in under 5 seconds, asks a question about the man's new office expansion, and steers the room away as if he is guiding traffic around an accident. Efficient, clean, immediate. Later that same week, a courier delivers a packet to the penthouse while Serafina is home alone. It is addressed to Roman's office, not their residence, which is odd enough to catch her attention. She does not open it. She simply sets it aside near his desk. That evening, when he notices the return label and sees one legal firm name printed across the envelope, something flickers across his face. Alarm first, then irritation, then the practiced calm he wears when he wants emotion hidden fast. He takes the packet to his study and shuts the door. Another time, while sorting a guest list for a fundraiser, Serafina sees Celeste's name on a preliminary donor invitation list attached to a partner foundation. She says nothing aloud, only pauses with her pen above the page. Roman notices anyway. "She will not be attending," he says. His tone is flat, too flat. Serafina looks up. "I did not ask." "No," he replies, "but I know what you were thinking." He takes the paper from her hand and moves to another topic. Even his sleep begins to tell on him. On certain nights, especially after difficult appointments or conversations touching legacy, inheritance, or children, Roman sleeps restlessly. He rarely speaks in full sentences, but once, sometime before dawn, Serafina wakes to hear him say one phrase into the darkness, with a strain she has never heard in his waking voice. "I did what I was supposed to do." By morning he remembers nothing, or pretends not to. Each moment alone could be dismissed. Together, they form something harder to ignore. Roman is not merely uninterested in discussing Celeste. He is still reacting to her. His body reacts. His sleep reacts. His control reacts. The first marriage is not buried history. It is active scar tissue, and certain words seem able to press straight against it. Serafina begins understanding that the issue is larger than curiosity or old gossip. Whatever happened with Celeste did not stay in the past. It followed Roman forward. And if it followed him forward, then some part of it has already entered their marriage too, whether he admits it or not. By the time winter begins giving way to early spring, Serafina no longer believes Celeste is merely an unpleasant chapter Roman prefers not to revisit. She believes there is a truth buried there, and not just any truth. A truth tied to shame. That realization comes to her slowly, then all at once. It is there in the way Roman reacts not only to Celeste's name, but to anything orbiting the subjects of fatherhood, failure, legacy, or private humiliation. It is there in the clipped answers, the sudden shutdowns, the visible strain that crosses his face before he forces it back under control. Shame has a different texture than anger. Anger pushes outward. Shame collapses inward, then builds walls around itself. Serafina has spent enough years reading rooms and human behavior to know the difference. Roman is not only hiding facts, he is hiding injury. And the injury seems attached to the part of him that most hates weakness being seen. One evening, as they prepare for a board dinner, Serafina watches him knot his tie in the mirror. The room is quiet, except for the soft rustle of fabric and the city humming far below. She sees the man the world praises, polished, successful, hard to shake. Yet all she can think about is how quickly that image seems to crack whenever the past touches a certain nerve. She does not mention Celeste that night. Instead, she asks something broader. Do you ever think some things follow people because they were never faced properly? Roman pauses, only for a second. Then he finishes knotting the tie and says, "Not everything needs to be dug up to be survived." The line stays with her long after they leave the apartment. Survived. Not understood, not healed. Survived. That single word tells her more than he intended. Roman has not made peace with whatever happened in his first marriage. He has endured it by burying it, controlling the narrative around it, and refusing access to the wound itself. Yet buried pain has habits. It leaks. It changes how a person responds to love, trust, and uncertainty. It teaches them to protect themselves long after the original danger has passed. Serafina begins looking back across their marriage with sharper clarity, his increasing control, his reactions during their struggle to have a child, the bitter edge that appears whenever uncertainty enters their private life, the way suspicion seems able to rise in him faster than vulnerability. All of it begins to connect around one invisible center. Something in the past taught Roman that this particular area of life, marriage, children, private trust, is not simply tender, it is dangerous. That frightens her, not because she thinks he is beyond reach, because she now understands she may be living with consequences created by an old deception or humiliation he never had the courage to name. She stands one morning by the penthouse windows with coffee cooling in her hands and looks out over the city while a new certainty settles quietly inside her. There is a buried truth. It is tied to Celeste. It is tied to shame. And until that truth comes into the light, whatever was broken in Roman before she ever met him will keep reaching into their marriage, shaping his fear, his control, and the distance growing between them. For the first time, Serafina stops seeing his silence as privacy. She sees it for what it is, a locked door guarding a wound that has never stopped bleeding beneath the surface. The appointment begins before either of them enters the room. It begins in the way Roman arrives late. Serafina has been seated for nearly 12 minutes by the time he steps into the clinic office, phone still in hand, apology already half-spoken and half-distracted. His tie is slightly loosened, his expression drawn tight by a board meeting that clearly has not left him just because he changed buildings. He kisses Serafina on the cheek in a quick, formal way and sits beside her, but even then she can feel how far away he is. His knee bounces once, his jaw tightens when his phone vibrates again. He silences it without looking at her. The doctor enters with the same calm professionalism as before, a folder in hand, voice measured, careful not to promise what medicine cannot promise yet. There are follow-up concerns, a few patterns worth monitoring, more tests recommended, nothing final, nothing simple, more patience, more communication, more observation before any firm conclusion should be made. Serafina listens closely. Roman hears only the spaces where certainty is missing. Each cautious phrase seems to irritate him more. She can see it in the way he leans back with crossed arms, then forward again, as if willing the doctor to stop speaking in circles and say something definitive. When the physician emphasizes that blame is not helpful and that reproductive difficulty often carries many possible factors, Roman's eyes lower, but not in relief, in resistance. Serafina asks thoughtful questions. Roman asks direct ones. His tone stays controlled, but there is tension underneath every word. He wants clear causes, clear timelines, clear responsibility. The doctor refuses to offer false clarity just to soothe him. The room grows colder because of it. By the time they leave, Serafina already knows silence will follow them home. The elevator ride down is quiet. The lobby passes in a blur of polished stone and low voices. Their driver opens the back door, and they slide into the car without touching. Roman looks out the window almost the entire time, one hand pressed against his mouth, the other resting near his phone. Serafina sits beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap, replaying the appointment in her head, and trying to decide whether comfort is still possible between them tonight. She wants to say something gentle, something steady. They have survived hard evenings before. Perhaps this can still be softened if she reaches for him early enough. But the city outside the window seems to move through its own silence, and Roman gives her nothing to enter. Not one glance, not one question. Not one sign that he still sees her as his partner in this, rather than another source of frustration. When the car stops beneath their building, he gets out first. He does not wait. In the private elevator, the mirrored walls throw their distance back at them from every angle. Serafina watches his reflection instead of his face. She sees a man braced for battle, though no one is attacking him. She sees a hurt pride hardening into something more dangerous than sadness. She sees a version of Roman she has begun to fear, not because he is loud, but because he can go cold enough to turn a home into a courtroom. By the time the penthouse doors open, she feels it clearly. This is not going to be another tense night, followed by a weak apology. Something in him has crossed into a darker place, and before the night ends, he is going to drag her into it. The penthouse is silent, except for the small sounds Roman makes as he moves through it. His shoes cross the stone floor. Ice clicks against crystal as he pours himself a drink at the bar near the windows. He does all of it without looking at Serafina once. The city glows beyond the glass, but inside the room, the air feels sealed, tight, and hostile. Serafina closes the door behind them and stands there for a second, willing herself to remain calm. She has learned how to move through difficult rooms. She has managed executive scandals, public pressure, and human egos far larger than their actual strength. But this is different because this room is her home, and the man standing with his back to her is not a client or a stranger. He is her husband. He is supposed to be the one person she never has to prepare for, like an opponent. She steps closer. Roman. No answer. You do not have to shut me out. He lifts the glass, drinks, and keeps his eyes on the skyline. A flash of sadness moves through her, but she pushes past it. I know today was hard, but we are still on the same side. That is when he turns. His face is not wild. It is controlled in the most frightening way. Hurt sharpened into certainty. Suspicion dressed as reason. Tell me the truth, he says. She frowns. About what? His mouth twists with bitter disbelief. Do not make me drag it out of you. For a moment, she does not understand. Then, the direction of his stare, the tone, the tension in the line of his shoulders, all gather into something cold and unmistakable. Roman, she says slowly. What are you talking about? He steps closer. At the clinic. The way you looked at the doctor. The way you answered certain things. You expect me to believe there is nothing else going on? Serafina stares at him. There is nothing else going on. Then why does it feel like I am the last person in my own marriage to know the truth? The words hit with the force of insult, because they are not confusion. They are accusation. He is not asking for clarity. He is implying betrayal. Something hidden, something shameful, something that could explain their private struggle if only she would stop pretending innocence. Her voice drops. You think I am hiding something serious from you? Roman does not answer directly, and that silence tells her more than any sentence could. He paces once, runs a hand over his face, then says, Too many things are not adding up. The room seems to tilt. Months of grief, of appointments, of trying to protect what remained of their closeness. And this is where he has arrived. Not compassion, not fear shared honestly. Suspicion, the ugliest kind, because it takes the most private pain of their marriage and turns it into a charge against her character. She asks him one more time, because some part of her still cannot believe the man she married has become this man in front of her. Say it clearly. Do you believe I have deceived you? Roman looks at her with a wounded pride that feels emptier than rage. I do not know what to believe anymore. And with that, he puts her on trial inside her own home. For one suspended second after Roman speaks, Serafina hears nothing. Not the low hum of the climate system, not the city beyond the glass, not even her own breathing. All she can hear is the meaning. I do not know what to believe anymore. The sentence settles between them with final weight. It strips away every polished lie they have been telling themselves about stress, timing, patience, and difficult seasons. This is no longer a marriage strained by grief. This is a marriage where trust has broken at the root. She looks at Roman and feels a stillness rise inside her that frightens her more than panic would. Not because she is numb, because she understands. He is no longer reaching for her as his partner in pain. He is looking at her through the lens of suspicion. He is taking his fear, his shame, his need for control, and forcing them onto her body, her honesty, her dignity. He is asking her to defend herself against a betrayal he invented because uncertainty has become unbearable to him. Her voice comes low and measured. After everything we have gone through, this is what you think of me. Roman does not respond. He paces again, restless, unable to sit with what he has already done. She sees the conflict in him. Part of him knows he has crossed a line. Part of him wants to pull back. But pride holds him where cruelty already placed him. She asks the only question that matters now. Do you truly believe what you are implying? He stops moving. His shoulders tighten. For a brief second, she thinks he might say no. She thinks he might choose humility over fear. She thinks he might come back to himself before the damage becomes permanent. Instead, he says, "I said what I said." That is the moment something inside her breaks cleanly. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. It is the soundless collapse of the belief that love still makes this home safe. Serafina realizes she has been trying to save a marriage that Roman has already reshaped into a place where she must explain, reassure, defend, and minimize herself so he does not have to confront the truth about his own wounds. She sees in one brutal flash that his apologies have always protected his pride more than her pain, that his silence has trained her to shrink, that his control has been tightening around her life for months, that tonight he has finally shown her the full destination of it. A marriage can survive grief. A marriage can survive disappointment. A marriage can survive long seasons of uncertainty if two people keep choosing each other honestly. But once one person becomes the judge and the other becomes the suspect, the spirit of the marriage starts dying in plain sight. She nods once. There are no tears yet. No raised voice. Only clarity. "All right," she says. Roman looks unsettled by her calm, as if he expected pleading, anger, anything except this deep withdrawal of trust. She turns away from him and walks toward the guest room. Behind her, he says nothing. No apology, no correction, no footsteps following her. And that silence confirms what she now knows. The man she loved may still exist somewhere beneath all his fear, but the marriage itself has collapsed under the weight of what he chose to believe about her. Inside the guest room, Serafina closes the door softly and leans against it as if she needs its solid weight to keep her standing. Only then does she let herself feel what just happened. Not only the accusation itself, though that alone is enough to wound. Not only the humiliation of being looked at by her own husband, as if she is capable of hiding some grave truth while he plays the victim of it. What crushes her most is the deeper realization underneath it all. Roman did not trust her before tonight. Tonight only exposed it. The signs were already there. The monitoring disguised as care, the silence used as punishment. The way she had begun measuring her words, adjusting harmless parts of herself, shrinking around his moods without fully admitting it. She had kept telling herself the marriage was under pressure, not in danger. She had kept defending the softer version of him because memory can be a powerful liar when the heart is afraid to lose what it once loved. But now the illusion is gone. She sits on the edge of the bed and presses a hand to her chest, breathing through the ache. The guest room is neat, quiet, untouched by the life they built together. It feels strange that one of the safest spaces in the penthouse is the room where their shared life barely exists. Yet, perhaps, that is fitting. Safety has been leaving the marriage for some time now. Tonight, it simply stopped pretending. For the first time in months, perhaps longer, Serafina thinks a thought without trying to soften it for his sake. I cannot stay where I am no longer treated with honor. That thought changes something inside her. She had entered this marriage believing love meant standing through hardship. Now she understands that love without respect becomes a trap. Wealth cannot redeem it. Public image cannot protect it. A beautiful home cannot cleanse it. Status cannot make suspicion holy. Once dignity is lost, all the polished surfaces in the world mean nothing. She wipes at her face, though tears have only just begun. They are not the tears of confusion anymore. They are the tears that come when truth finally defeats denial. She is grieving, yes, grieving the man she believed Roman to be, grieving the future she pictured in these rooms, grieving the part of herself that kept hoping patience would turn fear back into tenderness. But beneath the grief is something steadier. Choice. She may not be able to control what Roman believes tonight. She may not be able to undo what he said. But she can decide what kind of woman she will remain after hearing it. And she will not remain one who begs for innocence inside a marriage that has already placed her on trial. If dignity matters more than status, tell me in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because Serafina is about to make the choice that changes everything. By the time she lies down without sleeping, the decision is not fully acted on yet. But emotionally, she has already stepped away from the marriage. And once a woman reaches that point with clear eyes, the rest is often only paperwork. The next morning begins as if nothing happened. That is what makes it unbearable. Roman leaves flowers outside the guest room door before he leaves for the office. White lilies, arranged with expensive restraint. The sort of apology that looks elegant from a distance and says almost nothing up close. Serafina opens the door, stares at them for several seconds, then calls building staff and asks that they be removed. He sends a message before noon. I was under pressure. We need to talk tonight. She reads it once and sets the phone face down. 3 days later, he finally says the word apology aloud. But even then it comes wrapped in his own discomfort. He speaks about stress, about fear, about how much the uncertainty has been affecting him. He says he did not mean it the way it sounded, though he never quite explains what better way such an accusation could have sounded. Every sentence keeps circling back to his state of mind, his pressure, his confusion. He wants understanding before he offers repair. He wants mercy before he fully names harm. Serafina listens. That is when she knows with complete certainty that this cannot be fixed from inside the marriage they still have. Roman is sorry for what the moment cost him. Sorry for the tension. Sorry for the rupture. Sorry for the consequences that are starting to take shape around his words. But he is still not standing in the wound he created for her. He is still speaking from the center of himself, and that center has become too dangerous a place for her to live. Over the next several weeks, she moves with quiet clarity. She sleeps in the guest room permanently. She returns to work with sharper focus than she has felt in months. She begins noticing how light her body feels in the hours when Roman is not near her. Not happy, not healed, but less braced. That difference matters. It tells her what her heart has already accepted. A person can love someone and still need to leave them to survive with self-respect intact. She contacts an attorney through a trusted recommendation. The meeting takes place in a private office with no dramatic music, no trembling speeches, no need for explanation beyond the facts. Marriage, assets, public profile, no children. Emotional breakdown of trust. She hears herself say the words calmly, and the calm confirms the truth. By the end of that week, the papers are in motion. When she tells Roman, he looks stunned, then offended, then hollow. You are filing for divorce over one terrible night? Serafina meets his gaze without lowering her own. I am filing because that night showed me what this marriage has become. He tries to argue, says all marriages go through ugly moments, says she is being cold, says she owes the life they built more effort than this. But effort is not what has been missing. Safety is, trust is, respect is. She does not raise her voice. I stood with you through pressure, she says. I stood with you through grief. I stood with you while you brought your anger home and made me live inside it. But I will not stand here and be treated like a suspect in my own marriage. That ends it more than any signature ever could. 6 weeks after the accusation, Serafina files for divorce. Publicly, the statement released to the press is brief, elegant, and controlled. Private family matter, mutual respect, request for discretion. Privately, she knows the truth. She did not leave because she stopped loving him first. She left because love without dignity had already stopped being a marriage. The divorce begins with silence, and in some ways, that hurts more than noise would have. There are no leaked headlines, no public accusations, No dramatic scenes outside court buildings. The official statement released to the press is brief, polished, and empty of truth. It calls the separation a private family matter. It asks for discretion. It offers the public nothing to feed on. To strangers, it looks graceful. To Serafina, it feels like one last performance. She does not want spectacle. She does not want revenge. She wants clarity. That difference becomes the center of how she moves through the early days of the divorce. While Roman seems to assume the process will stay simple, contained, and largely procedural, Serafina understands that paperwork alone will not settle what has broken inside her. A marriage ended the night he accused her, yes. But even after filing, one question continues pressing against her mind. Why? Why had Roman become so sharp, so suspicious, so emotionally dangerous around the very subject that should have brought vulnerability instead of blame? Why did every conversation touching children, trust, or uncertainty seem to awaken something older and harsher in him? Why had Celeste's name always carried that same strange force, even when he spoke of her as though she no longer mattered? Serafina has spent too much of her life reading patterns to ignore one now. So when she meets with her attorney, Lenora Haynes, she does not speak only about assets, privacy protections, or settlement structures. Of course those things matter. Roman is wealthy, visible, and deeply invested in public control. The legal process must be clean. But when Lenora asks if there is anything beyond fairness that Serafina wants the case to uncover, she answers without hesitation, "I want answers." Lenora studies her. About his conduct in the marriage? Serafina shakes her head once. About what came into the marriage before I ever understood it was there. That response changes everything. What starts as a quiet divorce begins taking on another shape beneath the surface. Standard discovery is requested. Financial disclosures, prior settlement references, property transfers, archived correspondence, old legal obligations. Serafina does not ask for these things because she wants gossip. She asks because she no longer trusts silence. Silence protected too much harm already. In private, she starts reflecting on the difference between leaving a marriage and understanding it. Leaving removes you from the pain. Understanding tells you whether the pain belonged only to the marriage or whether something older had been living inside it all along. The more she thinks about Roman's reactions, the more she feels sure of one thing. The accusation in the penthouse did not come from nowhere. It came from a wound. And Serafina intends to find out exactly where that wound began, even if the answer is buried in places Roman spent years making sure no one would ever look. At first, discovery looks ordinary. Lenora's office receives the standard wave of documents that accompany wealthy divorces: financial statements, property records, confidentiality agreements, prior legal disclosures, settlement references tied to Roman's earlier divorce. Most of it is dry, procedural, and stripped of emotion. Numbers rarely confess the truth on their own. They only point toward where someone once worked very hard to bury it. Still, Lenora's team knows what to look for. The early review reveals that Roman's first divorce had been far more carefully sealed than most cases of its kind. That alone is not enough to prove anything. Powerful people often pay for discretion. But something about the structure of the records begins to feel inconsistent. Certain financial adjustments appear without full explanation. A prior property reallocation seems tied to a temporary change in family status assumptions. A support arrangement was revised, then reclassified under a different rationale months later. The dates do not align cleanly. The legal logic feels patched rather than natural. Lenora flags the discrepancy immediately. More supporting records are requested. What follows is a slow opening of doors Roman likely assumed would stay locked forever. Additional filings surface through connected financial channels rather than the divorce petition itself. Sealed notes linked to settlement negotiations are pulled into view. Internal legal summaries refer to a changed domestic circumstance significant enough to pause certain divorce steps and alter the posture of asset protection. Serafina sits across from Lenora during one of these review meetings and feels the room shift around a single sentence. "This was not a straightforward first divorce," Lenora says quietly. Serafina does not interrupt. She has learned by now that truth often comes best when not rushed. Lenora slides a page toward her. Something happened during the separation process that changed the legal strategy. It affected money, timing, and risk exposure. What kind of thing? Lenora hesitates only long enough to stay precise. Something tied to possible family obligations. Possible family obligations. The phrase lands in Serafina's chest with immediate force. She thinks of the hallway gossip at the winter auction, the baby rumor, the way Roman's face had closed when she mentioned it, the absolute finality with which he had shut her out. Now, legal records are pointing toward the same shadow. The discovery becomes less abstract from that point on. Serafina no longer feels she is examining an old divorce. She feels she is approaching the hidden center of Roman's fear. Every new page confirms that his first marriage contained some event serious enough to alter negotiations, reshape financial decisions, and justify extreme confidentiality measures. That is not normal heartbreak. That is controlled fallout. Lenora asks if she wants to continue pressing. Serafina's answer is immediate. Yes, because the deeper they go, the more certain she becomes that the first marriage did not simply end badly. It left behind sealed damage. Damage Roman dragged forward untouched. Damage that reached into their life together and changed the way he loved, doubted, and finally accused. And if discovery has now opened the records where that damage first took form, Serafina will not look away before the truth is complete. The truth emerges in fragments before it becomes undeniable. One record mentions a pause in separation negotiations. Another references adjusted support planning. A legal summary notes heightened confidentiality concerns tied to a developing family matter. None of the lines says enough alone, but together, and in sequence, they start building one clear and devastating picture. Years earlier, while Roman was preparing to end his first marriage, Celeste claimed she was pregnant. The claim changed everything. Negotiations that had been moving toward a clean separation immediately slowed. Financial structures were reconsidered. Long-term planning was revised. Roman's legal team began preparing for the possibility of future paternal obligations. Internal communication shows advisors urging caution, not only because of the emotional implications, but because public mishandling of a pregnancy connected to a high-profile divorce could become a serious reputational problem. Serafina reads the documents in silence. This was never just social gossip. It was real enough inside legal and financial channels to affect decisions with lasting consequences. Roman did not merely hear a rumor once and overreact to it. He believed he was facing fatherhood in the middle of a collapsing marriage, and he reorganized major parts of his life around that belief. Then discovery reaches the later records. Follow-up medical references become inconsistent. Supporting documentation appears manipulated, partial, or impossible to verify. A later sealed review notes that no confirmed pregnancy had ever been established. Another line, written in the dry language lawyers use when trying to make cruelty sound procedural, indicates that prior strategic concessions had been made under a claim that could not later be substantiated. There was no child. There had never been a verified pregnancy. Celeste's claim had been false. The words are clinical on paper, but their emotional violence is unmistakable. Serafina feels anger rise with almost shocking force, not because of money, though money was moved, not because of public image, though Roman surely protected that at great cost. What unsettles her most is the intimacy of the deception. To use the possibility of a child as leverage during the unraveling of a marriage, to turn fatherhood into a bargaining tool, to let hope sit in the room long enough to rearrange legal decisions before the truth surfaced. It is a lie aimed at the deepest, most vulnerable place. Lenora folds her hands after Serafina finishes reading. This was contained aggressively. By him? By everyone involved. That makes sense. Roman would have wanted it buried to protect his name, his company, and perhaps most of all his pride. Celeste would have wanted it buried because exposure would have destroyed credibility at once. Wealth has a way of sealing ugliness behind paperwork. If enough powerful people agree, silence serves them all. But silence does not erase damage. It only delays who gets hit by it. Now Serafina understands that the baby rumor she overheard was not idle society poison. It was the faded echo of something once real enough to shake Roman's world. A false pregnancy claim had entered his first marriage, twisted the end of it, and been buried under legal strategy and shame. And buried things, she now knows too well, do not stay harmless simply because no one says their name again. The false pregnancy claim explains the event. What discovery reveals next explains the scar it left behind. Among the sealed materials are follow-up correspondences from advisors and legal intermediaries connected to the aftermath of Roman's first divorce. Their language is measured, careful, almost sterile. Yet when Lenora helps map them against the wider record, the deeper truth becomes painfully clear. Celeste's deception did not only alter divorce terms, it reshaped the way Roman understood himself around fatherhood. One advisory note refers to assumptions retained by Mr. Duval concerning reproductive fault and familial failure. Another warns that Roman had accepted personal blame tied to the collapse narrative around the marriage in ways that could distort future legal judgment. The meaning is unmistakable once Serafina sees it. Roman had internalized shame, not just shame because the marriage failed, not just embarrassment because private humiliation had to be legally contained. Something more specific and far more dangerous. He had come to believe, at least in part, that he was the broken link in the chain of family. That he had failed in some hidden, essential way connected to children, legacy, and the future he once thought marriage would hold. Serafina reads the pages twice. Then again, a wave of understanding hits so hard it almost feels physical. Suddenly, Roman's behavior throughout their own struggle makes brutal sense. The sharpness after appointments, the restless need for certainty, the way uncertainty around children seemed to make him colder instead of more open, the speed with which pain turned into suspicion. He had not merely been grieving the possibility of disappointment with her. He had been reliving old humiliation through the lens of a wound he never truly faced. That does not make his behavior less destructive, but it makes the roots of it visible. Shame had lived in him for years, hidden beneath success, money, and polished control. Instead of naming it, he had buried it. Instead of healing it, he had built around it. Then, when life with Serafina touched that same territory, hope for a child, fear of failure, uncertainty he could not command, the buried shame woke up and searched for somewhere else to go. It landed on her. That is the part Serafina cannot ignore. Roman had not entered their marriage as a man merely scarred by old pain. He had entered carrying unexamined shame in the exact place where their private grief would later unfold. He did not know how to be vulnerable there. He knew only how to defend, manage, and eventually accuse. Lenora asks quietly, "Do you see now why he reacted the way he did?" Serafina closes the file with careful hands. "Yes," she says, and the answer is true. She sees it now. She sees the frightened man beneath the pride, the old lie beneath the present cruelty. The way fatherhood had become less a dream in Roman, and more a test he believed life kept forcing him to fail. But seeing the wound clearly does not erase the damage it caused once he chose to make her carry it with him. Understanding changes Serafina, but not in the way Roman might once have hoped. It softens confusion. It does not restore trust. After the records expose Celeste's deception and the shame Roman carried out of his first marriage, Serafina spends 2 days alone with the knowledge before discussing next steps with Lenora. She walks through the city without really seeing it. She sits by her apartment window at night and lets memory reorder itself. Every major moment in her marriage now looks different under this light. Roman's need for control, his brittle reactions after doctor visits, the tension around fatherhood, the accusation in the penthouse, none of it came from nowhere. It came from a man who had buried old humiliation so deeply he no longer recognized how much it was shaping the way he loved. That realization is painful. It is also clarifying. For the first time, Serafina understands the true cause behind his suspicion. He had not simply become cruel under pressure. He had mistaken the fear of being wounded again for proof that she must be hiding something from him. He had taken an old injury, one built from deception and shame, and dragged it into a marriage where it did not belong. But understanding a cause is not the same thing as excusing an outcome. That distinction becomes sacred to her. Because once a woman starts confusing explanation with permission, she begins betraying her own pain in the name of someone else's history. Serafina refuses to do that. She knows now. That Roman was deeply hurt before he met her. She can even feel compassion for the younger man who believed Celeste's lie, reorganized his life around it, and then buried the resulting shame instead of speaking it aloud. She sees the tragedy of that. She sees the damage it left behind. She also sees something else. Roman had choices. He could have told her the truth at any point in their marriage. He could have entered therapy before his fear turned into control. He could have chosen vulnerability over suspicion the night everything finally broke. He could have said, "I am terrified this is happening again." He could have said, "There is something from my past I never healed from, and I do not know how to carry this well." He said none of those things. He chose accusation. He chose to make her stand in the center of his fear and answer for an old deception she never committed. That is the damage explanation cannot wash clean. When Serafina meets Lenora again, her voice is calmer than before. There is grief in her, yes, but the grief no longer feels tangled. It feels ordered. "I understand him now," she says. Lenora waits. Serafina finishes the thought without hesitation. "But I am not going back into harm just because I understand where it began." That is the sentence that defines the end of the marriage more than any filing ever will. Roman's past explains him. It does not entitle him to her future. And, in accepting both truths at once, Serafina steps fully out of confusion and into something far stronger. Clear sight. The request comes near the end of the legal process, when most of the hardest truths have already surfaced and the final paperwork feels more inevitable than dramatic. Serafina receives the message on a grey afternoon while sitting at her temporary desk near the window of the coastal cottage she rented for a short stay away from Chicago. The sea is restless that day, not violent, but unsettled, the kind of motion that never fully calms even when the sky appears quiet. She has been reviewing fellowship notes for a program idea she has only just begun shaping in her mind when her phone lights up with a message from Roman. It is brief, no long explanation, no polished emotional speech, no attempt to force urgency through guilt. "I would like to ask for one private meeting before this ends. No lawyers, no pressure, just one conversation." She stares at the screen longer than she expects to. Months earlier, she would have felt her pulse quicken at any request from him, not knowing whether hope or hurt would arrive first. Now the feeling is different. Stillness, caution, a distant ache, yes, but also the unmistakable knowledge that she is no longer standing inside the storm of his moods. She is outside it now, and that distance allows her to think clearly. Her first instinct is to refuse, not out of cruelty, out of self-protection. She has already lived through enough of Roman's late realizations, enough flowers after silence, enough apologies shaped around his discomfort, enough moments where the cost of his self-discovery landed in her lap instead of in his own hands. She owes him nothing further in order to validate the truth she survived. Yet the request lingers, not because she hopes for reunion. That possibility has already left her heart, but because part of her knows endings sometimes need one final room, one final hour, where truth is spoken plainly enough that it no longer has to keep echoing in unfinished form. She has answers now. The discovery process gave her those. What she does not yet have is the sight of Roman standing before those answers without any wall left strong enough to hide behind. She thinks for a day before replying. When she does, her message is simple. One meeting, public place, daytime. Roman agrees immediately. The hotel lounge is chosen for privacy, without intimacy, elegant enough to avoid attention, neutral enough not to feel like memory. It is not one of their old places. Serafina makes sure of that. She has no interest in sitting among shared ghosts while trying to speak honestly about what remains. The meeting is set for 4, in the afternoon, a careful hour, not evening, not night, nothing that invites softness by atmosphere alone. When the day comes, she dresses with the same composed restraint that has steadied her through every major turn of the divorce. Cream blouse, structured coat, minimal jewelry, nothing chosen to impress. everything chosen to remind herself that she is entering this conversation as a whole woman, not as someone waiting to be emotionally rearranged. Roman is already there when she arrives. For 1 second, before he rises, she simply looks at him. He is not ruined, not visibly broken in any theatrical way, but something essential in his polish has thinned. The usual ease of command is missing. The certainty he once wore like a second suit no longer sits cleanly on him. He looks like a man who has run out of places to hide from himself. And as Serafina walks toward the table, she understands this meeting is not about whether the marriage can still be saved. It is about whether the truth, at last, can stand between them without disguise. He admits his fear and pride destroyed their marriage. Roman waits until the server leaves before he begins. For a brief moment, Serafina wonders if he will fall back into old habits, careful language, partial truths, the kind of controlled speech men like him often use when they want to appear honest without surrendering too much ground. But when he finally looks at her fully, she sees something different in his face. Exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion alone, though that is there too, a deeper kind. The wear of a man who has spent too long defending himself against realities that no longer agree to stay buried. "I know about the documents," he says. There is no preamble, no attempt to soften the subject. Serafina does not answer right away. She lets the silence remain long enough for the words to settle properly between them. He knows, which means he also knows that she knows. The old wall is gone. Roman folds his hands once, then unfolds them. It is the smallest visible sign of unease, but on him it reads loudly. "For years," he says, "I told myself what happened with Celeste was finished because it was no longer public. I thought if it stopped affecting my work, if it stopped appearing in conversation, then it had no power anymore." He pauses and gives a quiet, humorless breath. That was a lie. Serafina watches him carefully. This is the first time he has ever said Celeste's name to her, without either shutting down or shifting the room around himself. That alone tells her more than his tone. "She lied to me," he continues. "But the deeper truth is that I let that lie shape me, because I never wanted to look directly at what it did. I buried it. I turned it into silence and routine and control. I built a whole life around not having to feel humiliated again." The last word lands heavily. Humiliated. There it is. At last. Not merely hurt. Not merely betrayed. Humiliated. Roman says it as if naming the wound aloud costs him something, which it likely does. Men taught to confuse control with strength often speak of shame as though it might burn them if exposed to air. Serafina sits still, hands resting lightly around her untouched tea. Roman goes on. "When things became uncertain with us, especially around having a child, I did not know how to experience that uncertainty as itself. I was already somewhere else in my head, already back in a place I never dealt with honestly. I kept thinking I was reacting to the present. I was reacting to fear that had been waiting in me for years." His gaze lowers for a moment. When he looks up again, there is nothing polished in it. "I hurt you because I was afraid, but I also hurt you because I was proud. Pride made me feel safer than truth. Pride let me act like suspicion was smarter than vulnerability. Pride let me accuse you instead of admitting I was breaking." Serafina feels those words more sharply than she expects. Not because they change the outcome. They do not. But because they are the words she needed months earlier, before lawyers, before filings, before distance had hardened into finality. He is giving her truth now, and the tragedy is not that it is false. The tragedy is that it has arrived after the marriage no longer has a place to receive it. Roman's voice lowers. "I destroyed our marriage before that night in the penthouse. That night only made it impossible to pretend otherwise." For the first time since she sat down, Serafina sees his composure crack. Not fully, not dramatically, just enough to show the grief underneath. And in that moment, she believes him. He is not performing remorse. He is finally standing inside it. Serafina tells him understanding is not the same as repair. Serafina lets his confession breathe before she answers. She has imagined versions of this conversation before, in anger, in sadness, in the long quiet after discovery when memory kept trying to rearrange itself around new truth. In some of those imagined versions, she says more, in others, far less. But sitting across from Roman now, with daylight filtering through the lounge windows and no legal language left to hide behind, she feels no need for performance, only precision. "I understand," she says. Roman's eyes lift toward her at once. Something fragile moves through his face, not hope exactly, but the reflexive reach for it. So she continues, before he can mistake her meaning. "I understand what happened to you. I understand more now than I ever could have during the marriage. I understand why fatherhood became tied to fear in you. I understand why uncertainty made you harder instead of more open. I understand why you were carrying old shame into a life where you kept pretending it was no longer there." She pauses, steady and calm. But understanding is not the same as repair. The words land softly, but with final force. Roman lowers his gaze. He does not interrupt. Serafina folds her hands in her lap and keeps going, because she did not come here merely to hear his truth. She came here to speak her own, without compromise. "What happened to you explains a great deal," she says. "It does not erase what happened to me." She sees him absorb that. "You were wounded before I met you. I know that now. But when life stopped going the way you wanted, you did not tell me where the fear was coming from. You did not trust me with the truth. You managed me. You watched me. You made me smaller around your moods. And when everything finally broke, you made me stand in the center of your fear, as if I had earned your suspicion." Her voice never rises. It does not need to. "A marriage cannot survive that," she says. "Not because love disappears in one moment. Love doesn't work that way. But safety does. And once safety goes, love starts changing into something else." Roman closes his eyes briefly, as if the sentence cut precisely where it was meant to. Serafina feels grief then, not new grief, but the old grief clarified. She remembers the man who once painted part of a spare room in hopeful silence. The man who had kissed her forehead when she fell asleep beside him. The man who had made her feel, at least for a while, that honesty could live peacefully inside love. That man had been real, so had the man who accused her. Both truths still ache beside each other. "I am not here because I want you punished," she says. "And I am not here because I hate you. I don't. But I cannot rebuild a marriage on understanding alone. Repair needs trust. It needs safety. It needs the ability to stand near someone again without wondering when their fear will turn into judgment." Roman's voice is rough when he finally speaks. "I know." And Serafina believes that too, which is why what she says next comes without bitterness. "I can understand you and still leave. I can see your pain clearly and still refuse to live inside the damage it caused. Those things do not contradict each other." This time, he does not even try to argue, because the deepest truths, once spoken plainly, do not leave much room for negotiation. After that, neither of them speaks for a while. The pause is not awkward. It is full of everything that has finally been named. Everything that can no longer hide behind status, elegance, or legal restraint. Around them, the lounge continues in its low afternoon rhythm. Glasses clink softly somewhere near the bar. A server passes with measured steps. Two people at a far table speak in hushed tones that never reach the center of this one. But at their table, the world feels narrowed to truth. Roman looks older in silence than he did when she first arrived. Not by years, but by exposure. The cost of no longer defending himself against himself shows plainly now. Serafina feels no triumph in that, only sorrow, and a kind of respect born not from what he did, but from the fact that he is finally sitting still in the truth of it. It would be easy, in another kind of story, to let this become the moment where pain softens into promise, where tears redeem years, where one honest conversation bends two people back toward each other because love, after all, once existed strongly enough to matter. But Serafina knows better now. Some truths heal by ending false hope, not by reviving it. Roman reaches for his water, then sets it back down untouched. When he speaks again, his voice is lower than before. "I do not expect you to come back." She watches him carefully. There is no manipulation in the sentence, no hidden plea. "That matters." "I know," she says. He gives a small nod, accepting that she heard the deeper layer beneath the words. He is not asking for restoration. He is finally naming loss, without trying to manage its terms. "I am sorry," he says then, more simply than before. Not in the way I said it after that night. Not because I was under pressure. Not because I was confused. "I am sorry for making you carry what never belonged to you." That is the apology she deserved months ago. It does not undo anything, but it lands honestly, and honesty, even late, still has value. Serafina's eyes sting, though she does not let tears fall. "Thank you," she says. The answer surprises him slightly. Perhaps because gratitude sounds too gentle for the wreckage between them. But gratitude is not forgiveness in the careless sense. It is acknowledgement. He finally said the right thing without turning himself into the center of it. Roman's hands rest flat against the table now, still and unguarded. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me," he says, then stops himself as if he recognizes that even true words can become selfish if pushed too far. Serafina saves him from finishing the sentence. "We were real," she says quietly. "That is what makes this sad." He nods once, and that nod contains more grief than anything else either of them has said. When the meeting ends, there is no dramatic embrace, no collapsing into old familiarity, no desperate promise to stay in touch more than necessary. Serafina stands. Roman stands too. For one suspended second, they look at each other with the full weight of what they once were and what they will never be again. Then she reaches across the table and touches his hand, once. Not as reconciliation, as farewell. Roman's eyes shine with the kind of emotion he used to bury before it ever reached daylight. He does not stop her when she steps back. He does not ask for anything more. They leave the hotel separately. And though the pain goes with them, so does something else at last. Truth without disguise. The divorce finalizes 2 months later. Publicly, almost nothing changes in the way outsiders understand the story. Business columns move on to Roman's next project. Society pages lose interest once there is no scandal left to feed on. A few rumors survive in private circles, but rumors are thin things compared to truth, and the real truth remains where such truths often remain, in legal files, private sorrow, and the altered lives of the people who endured it. For Serafina, the end of the marriage does not feel like immediate freedom. It feels like space. And space, after a long season of emotional strain, becomes its own kind of rescue. She stays on the Massachusetts coast longer than first planned. The restored cottage, with its chipped shutters and salt-heavy air, gives her a rhythm that asks nothing performative of her. She walks in the mornings before breakfast. She writes in journals she never intends to publish. She lets her thoughts return in their own voice, no longer edited around another person's moods. For the first time in years, she notices what it feels like to move through a day without anticipating emotional weather before she speaks. Little by little, she begins returning to herself, not to the woman she was before Roman. Life does not work by reversal. Pain changes structure. But she becomes a stronger, clearer version of herself, one less willing to confuse endurance with loyalty, less tempted to call silence love simply because it shares a beautiful home with it. Out of that clearer self, an old dream returns. She creates a non-profit media fellowship for young women from underfunded communities who want careers in communications, journalism, and public advocacy. She names it Second Voice, because she has come to believe too many women spend years recovering the voice pain forced them to lower. Building it gives shape to her healing. It allows grief to become movement instead of simply memory. Roman's path is different, harder in some ways, because his healing requires him to walk toward what he spent years avoiding. He enters therapy quietly, not for image, not for redemption points, but because by now even he can no longer pretend success cancels emotional damage. He speaks aloud the things he once buried. Celeste's lie, the shame he internalized, the way fear in him became control, the marriage he destroyed by refusing to examine old pain before it touched new love. He steps back from some public appearances, restructures parts of his company, supports a men's mental health initiative without attaching his name too visibly to it. He apologizes privately to people Serafina never even knew had felt the harder edges of him. His growth is not dramatic, it is disciplined, and because of that, it may be real. Years later, Their paths cross once more at a scholarship fundraiser hosted by one of the first young women to come through Serafina's fellowship. The room is warm, hopeful, alive with the kind of future she once feared she had lost the ability to believe in. Roman arrives quietly, no entourage, no need to dominate the space. When he sees her, he smiles, and this time there is nothing guarded in it. He congratulates her on the program. She thanks him for coming. There is no bitterness in the room, no romance revived, no fantasy of reunion, only history, truth, and the quiet respect earned by two people who finally stopped lying to themselves. And that, in the end, is enough. There are many things a marriage can survive. It can survive stress. It can survive disappointment. It can survive seasons where life feels heavier than either person expected. It can survive money problems, family pressure, long work hours, and even grief, if two people stay honest enough to keep standing on the same side of the pain. But suspicion changes the structure of love itself. That is what this story reveals most clearly. Roman and Serafina do not lose each other in one loud, dramatic instant. They lose each other little by little. Each time fear is left unspoken. Each time control replaces comfort. Each time silence is used where honesty should have been. By the time the accusation finally comes, the marriage is already weakened by months of emotional distance. The cruel sentence in the penthouse does not create the collapse by itself. It exposes how much of the collapse was already underway. That is the real cost of suspicion inside love. Suspicion does not only question facts, it questions character. It places one person under emotional inspection while the other claims the right to judge from wounded pride. It turns partnership into defense. It makes tenderness feel dangerous, because the one who should receive your truth with care has already begun searching it for betrayal. And once that happens, love starts gasping for air. Serafina feels this cost deeply. She does not leave because she stops caring. She leaves because caring is no longer enough to make the relationship safe. That is one of the saddest truths about love. Feeling deeply for someone does not protect a bond if trust has been poisoned from the inside. You can still remember the soft moments. You can still ache for the better version of the person. You can still know the relationship held real beauty once. None of that changes the fact that suspicion, when left unchecked, turns love into a place where one person keeps shrinking just to survive the mood of the other. Roman pays a different cost. He lets old fear remain hidden so long that it starts shaping how he sees the woman who never harmed him. He mistakes private panic for wisdom. He treats suspicion like self-protection. In doing so, he destroys the one thing he most needed, a marriage where truth might have healed him if he had chosen vulnerability early enough. That is the tragedy. Suspicion often feels smart in the moment. It feels like defense. It feels like caution. It feels like refusing to be fooled twice. But in love, suspicion can become a weapon that injures the wrong person while protecting the wrong wound. And by the time the suspicious heart realizes what it has done, the damage may already be too deep to repair. That is why this story matters. Not because it is only about betrayal, divorce, or buried secrets. It matters because it shows how dangerous it is to carry old pain into new love without naming it. Unhealed fear rarely stays contained. It leaks. It hardens tone. It reshapes trust. It makes the innocent person closest to you pay for injuries they did not cause. Love cannot thrive under that weight for long. At some point, one person stops feeling chosen and starts feeling watched. And once that change takes root, the heart begins preparing to leave long before the body does. From the outside, Serafina's life looked like the kind many people envy without question. She lived in a penthouse above Chicago. She attended elegant events. She stood beside one of the city's youngest real estate billionaires. Her clothes were tailored, her life was polished, and her marriage seemed wrapped in the kind of beauty and influence that convinces strangers everything beneath the surface must be secure. If someone had taken a photograph of her at any one of those public events, they would have seen grace, poise, and privilege. They would not have seen the cost. That is why dignity matters more than status. Status can decorate pain. It cannot heal it. Status can hide tension behind polished glass and expensive lighting. It cannot make a home emotionally safe. Status can convince the outside world that a woman has won, even while she is losing parts of herself in private, just to keep the peace. That is the trap Serafina finally refuses. She understands at the deepest level that no level of comfort, wealth, or admiration is worth remaining in a love where respect has started to die. That choice defines her strength more than any glamorous image ever could. She does not file for divorce because she is impulsive. She does not leave because marriage became difficult. She leaves because the line between hardship and humiliation has been crossed. Roman's accusation makes one truth impossible to ignore. He is no longer treating her as a trusted partner. He is treating her as a suspect. And once a woman has to defend her integrity inside the very relationship that should protect it, she has already been asked to trade dignity for attachment. Serafina refuses that trade. That refusal is powerful because many people do not recognize the moment when staying starts costing too much. They keep thinking comfort will compensate for disrespect. They keep hoping beautiful surroundings will soften emotional damage. They keep telling themselves the public image of a relationship means something about its private health. But status has never been a substitute for honor, not in love, not in marriage, not in any bond that asks a person to give their full self. Dignity is different. Dignity is the quiet inner line that says, I will not remain where I am being reduced. It does not shout. It does not perform. It simply stands. Serafina reaches that line in the guest room when she realizes Roman's fear has already changed the terms of the marriage beyond what love alone can repair. From that point on, leaving is not weakness. It is the act of honoring what remains unbroken inside her. Roman's wealth cannot compete with that. His image cannot compete with that. The life they built cannot compete with that. And the story reminds us why. Because at the end of the day, people do not survive on luxury. They survive on truth, peace, and the ability to look at themselves without shame for what they tolerated too long. Serafina chooses the harder road in the short term: divorce, grief, uncertainty, rebuilding. But it is the cleaner road in the long term. She keeps herself intact. That matters more than every photograph of their glamorous life ever did. Because status can impress a room. Dignity can save a life. One of the most important lessons in this story is the difference between intensity and intimacy. Many people confuse the two at first. Intensity feels powerful. It moves fast. It carries strong emotion, grand gestures, sharp longing, deep focus, and the sense that the relationship means everything because it feels overwhelming. Roman and Serafina have moments like that in the beginning. The private dinners, the long looks, the proposal in the historic library, the feeling that he sees her more clearly than others ever have, the sense that she brings peace to a man the world only knows as controlled and hard to reach. All of that carries intensity, and for a while, it feels beautiful. But intensity is not the same as intimacy. Intimacy is quieter. It is built, not performed. It lives in emotional safety, consistent honesty, and the ability to tell the truth without fearing what the truth will be turned into. Intimacy does not ask one person to manage the other's unresolved wounds in silence. It does not depend on gifts after discomfort or affection after cold withdrawal. It does not keep one partner guessing which version of love will enter the room each night. That is where Roman and Serafina fail. They have intensity, deep attraction, strong chemistry, emotional pull, high stakes, powerful moments of closeness. But over time, the story shows that intensity without safety will not hold. Roman's love becomes mixed with control. His care becomes mixed with monitoring. His desire for closeness becomes tangled with fear he never names honestly. What looks passionate from a distance starts feeling heavy up close, because true intimacy is missing from the places where it matters most. Serafina learns this slowly, then all at once. She learns it when she starts choosing her words more carefully at home. She learns it when tenderness becomes threaded with pressure around having a child. She learns it when silence after conflict starts feeling like punishment instead of space. And she learns it fully when Roman accuses her rather than trusting her, In that moment, all the intensity in their love is exposed as insufficient. The marriage may still hold strong feeling, but feeling is not enough where intimacy has already been damaged. That lesson matters beyond this one story. Many people remain in painful relationships because the emotion is strong. They tell themselves the highs must mean the bond is special. They confuse obsession with depth, volatility with passion, possessiveness with devotion. But true intimacy does not leave you emotionally unsafe. It does not require you to shrink. It does not make you prove your innocence in exchange for closeness. Intensity can make a relationship unforgettable. Only intimacy can make it healthy. That is why Serafina's later healing matters so much. When she eventually reopens her heart to warmth again, she notices the difference. Safety before drama, steadiness before grand display, listening before assumption. In that contrast, she finally understands what her marriage lacked beneath all its beauty and force. Intensity rushes. Intimacy stays. Intensity can take your breath away. Intimacy gives it back. And when a person has lived through the difference, they rarely confuse the two again. This is the part of the story where the deepest questions stay with you. Not the legal ones, not the social ones, the human ones. What would you have done in Serafina's place? Would you have stayed long enough to see if understanding could create a second chance? Would you have left the moment the accusation crossed the line? Would you have listened to Roman's final confession and felt your heart soften, or would the damage have already gone too deep for repair? These are not easy questions, and that is exactly why they matter. Because this story is not built on simple villains and simple heroes. Roman is not harmless, and he is not innocent. He wounds the woman who loved him because he refused to confront the wound already living in him. That is real. That is serious. That is not something to romanticize. At the same time, he is not empty of conscience. He is not incapable of change. By the end, he does what many people never do. He faces the truth, admits the harm without hiding behind excuses, and begins the slow, quiet work of becoming less ruled by fear. So another question rises beside the first one. Did Roman deserve forgiveness? That depends on what you believe forgiveness means. Some people hear forgiveness and imagine reunion, a second wedding, a restored marriage, a perfect emotional ending where love returns because truth was finally spoken. But forgiveness does not always look like return. Sometimes forgiveness is simply refusing to let bitterness govern your future. Sometimes it is understanding the wound in someone else without inviting that wound back into your life. Sometimes it is saying, I see what hurt you, but I will not stand close enough to be harmed by it again. That is the path Serafina takes. She does not leave the story full of revenge. She does not dedicate her future to hating Roman. She carries truth, grief, and clear boundaries. In many ways, that is a mature form of forgiveness, one that does not confuse mercy with self-abandonment. So now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were Serafina? Would you have walked away the same way she did, or would you have tried once more after Roman finally told the truth? And do you believe Roman deserved forgiveness, even if he did not deserve another chance at marriage with her? Tell me in the comments, because stories like this stay alive through honest reflection. And if this journey pulled you in, if it made you think about love, trust, dignity, and the hidden cost of silence, like this video, subscribe to the channel and stay here with me for more powerful stories that do more than entertain, stories that leave you with something real to carry. End with a strong emotional lesson and final subscribe push. In the end, this story leaves behind one lesson more powerful than wealth, more lasting than heartbreak, and more useful than any polished public image. Love is not proven by how much pain you can survive in silence. Love is proven by how safe the truth remains between two people. Roman and Serafina begin with beauty, attraction, promise, and a future that looks almost perfect from the outside. But what destroys them is not the absence of feeling, it is the corruption of trust. Roman lets old shame stay buried until it starts shaping how he sees the woman beside him. He chooses pride over honesty, control over vulnerability, suspicion over partnership. By the time he understands what he has done, the marriage is already too damaged to hold the truth. He should have spoken much sooner. Serafina teaches the opposite lesson. She shows that strength is not always staying. Sometimes strength is recognizing when love has stopped being safe, when status has become an expensive disguise for pain, and when dignity must be protected even at the cost of a life others admire. She does not win because she marries wealth. She wins because she leaves with herself intact. That is the emotional heart of this story. Old wounds do not stay in the past just because they are hidden. Suspicion is not wisdom when it punishes the innocent. Intensity is not intimacy. And understanding someone's pain does not require you to remain inside the damage it causes. Those truths matter in every kind of love. They matter in marriage. They matter in friendship. They matter in family. They matter anywhere trust is supposed to live. So as this story closes, let it leave you with one question stronger than all the others. Are you building your relationships on appearances, strong emotion and unspoken hope? Or are you building them on truth, safety, and the courage to be fully known without turning that knowledge into a weapon? That is where real love begins, and that is where it survives. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that self-respect is not something to trade away for comfort, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story. Share this with someone who needs the reminder that love should never cost them their dignity. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. And until the next story, protect your peace, honor your truth, and never mistake being chosen for being safe.